can sit anywhere you like.
Hey, Liz.
Okay, so we're here about to begin the Historic Review Commission meeting for Monday, October 3rd. We're going to begin, first of all, call the meeting to order at 4:03 p.m. and begin with roll call. Craig Pepper. Dave Brennan.
Present.
Mark Tannenbaum.
Present.
Melinda Meyer here. Jeff Salonis.
Present.
Jason Wazorek.
Present.
Chris Kinder.
Present.
Fantastic. So we'll begin with the approval of the minutes from our August 1st meeting. You'll remember that we had to cancel our September meeting due to a last-minute issue with scheduling with the Zoom, the city Zoom account. So we go back to August. The minutes have been provided to us. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented and or suggested amendments?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second to approve those.
Okay, motion to approve made by Dave Brennan, second made by Mark Tannenbaum. Do we have any further conversation on the minutes? Any further discussion? Hearing none, approval. All those in favor of approving the motion to accept the minutes as presented, please signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent, minutes passed. We have public comments. Do we have anyone here, either on Zoom or physically in the building, that would like to present to the Historic Review Commission?
No one's on Zoom?
Okay. Very good. Then we will close our public comment section and move on to old business. Chris, would you like to take us through old business?
Sure. So first, kind of an update on the preservation plan. Next week, the Lakota group will be in town. They'll arrive Monday night, which is a holiday, but they'll be here the 11th through the 13th. We have kind of a jam-packed schedule of interview sessions with stakeholders. All of those invitations have been sent out and arranged. We've gotten some great responses. Very few people have declined, and a lot of people I expected would decline have accepted the meeting, so it looks like we'll have some pretty engaging interview sessions. An update, we will not be having a public meeting during this visit. We have opted to postpone that meeting for another month so that they can, once the interview sessions are done, they can take all that information back, as well as the survey and the field work they're going to do while they're here. They can take that back and then prepare a program to present to the public in perhaps a month. So we're looking at maybe sometime in November or early December to have them return and do an actual public meeting, maybe 2 public meetings here in the city. We will still have the pop-up workshop, which will be focused on historic preservation in the underrepresented communities. We've gotten some great response on that. I believe the commission, as well as our preservation plan steering committee, has been invited to that meeting. And Mr. Johnny Johnson is helping arrange maybe a couple other people that we did not have contact information for to be at the meeting as well. So that should be a pretty successful meeting.
Chris, where's the pop-up meeting going to be?
It will be at ECAT.
Okay.
And I believe the Ada Lawrence Community Room, that'll be at 6:30. We may need some assistance helping to set up chairs and such. Because of the schedule, I may rely on some people to be there to kind of help set up. I have to be here to help kind of guide people in and out of the building during the interview sessions, and our last one is at 5 o'clock here. So once that's done, I can then run over to ECAT and help that way as well. Other than that, we did have, and I'll mention more in my report, we did have our first kind of introductory meeting with the Historic Preservation Plan Steering Committee. Right now, we're just ready for Lakota to arrive and kind of really kick this thing off.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions from commissioners?
Melinda, I just wondered if we, for Dave, should just tell him what
he may already know, but what ECAT stands for and where it is. Just, you know, so instead of the acronym, Erie Center for Arts and Technology, in a former middle school.
Yes, a former historic middle school. Great use of preservation, so yes, always forget the acronyms.
Are we expected to attend these meetings?
You're invited to attend, you're not expected to. We would appreciate any support that we could get. I think it'll be good, especially in that particular setting. The topic that we're going to be talking about, I think will be good for all of us to kind of listen in and hear what the community has to say.
Could you send us an agenda? And like, who's good?
We don't have an agenda, but I did send out calendar invites. I don't know that a particular agenda. I'll reach out to Lakota and see if they can create an agenda for that specific meeting.
Mark, are you talking about the agendas per meeting, or are you talking about the agenda for the 3 days that the Lakota group is in town?
Yeah, I just wondered if there was 3 days if we were going to come in and see ourselves, or if we had to go out and coming back and forth, or
So
however.
we do actually have a calendar.
We do have a tentative kind of proposed schedule. It's been changed just slightly, so I need to get a final one. But I can send what I have. The ones that the review commission would be a part of, I sent out calendar invites for those. And I believe there is one with the Historic Review Commission specifically. There's a couple with the steering committee that I may have included the review commission on. And then the pop-up session on Tuesday the 11th, I've included as well.
And I'm sorry, what days were those?
They'll be here the 10th, but really kick off the 11th through the 13th. The 13th will be mostly a day where they're doing field work.
Chris, I've sent the invite out to people. What's been the outreach again? Is just contact neighborhood groups, and there was the email list to get people there?
Yes, so each interview session is a specific topic or group. So what we've done, a lot of it is city staff or city employees. Melinda and Jeff have been great about helping compile lists for like museums and libraries, universities.
Okay, that's right.
We have a group that's focused on community-based organizations. We had to reschedule that one for the Thursday, but it'll be held at OWB. And we've had good response for that. And then both Melinda and Johnny Johnson have helped with putting together a list for the pop-up workshop.
Great.
And so I've created all those calendar invites based upon the list that I've received.
Hopefully it results in a good turnout. So that's
It
great.
seems
Thank you.
so far, if people come that say they are coming, then it should be, for all of it, should be pretty effective.
Excellent. So just to hold on to Mark's question, Chris, when the revised schedule for Lakota's visit is finished, would you be willing to resend that
Absolutely.
revision out to the commission?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll send it out to the commission and to the steering committee.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any further questions from commissioners? Okay, let's jump then to the review of our commission assistance and mentoring program, our camp training that we had a couple of
Yes.
Saturdays ago.
First of all, I forgot, I did receive today a thank you card from Ramona Bartos, who is one of the trainers, just a thank you for having them come. Talked about how great she thought Erie was. She really enjoyed the tour we gave them on the night before and really appreciated everything. And also, once again, reiterated how excited she was to have the mayor even come and do an introduction. That's apparently something that they don't get very much of as actual city officials showing up to do something like that. So they were very impressed with that. It was a great training session, I thought. I think it covered all the basics. It was tailored towards Erie. I think gave a lot of great ideas. I think it helped a lot of our department officials kind of help understand what we're trying to do and what we could do with this program, help understand what surveys are, help understand what National Register is, help understand how to build a historic preservation program for a city. So we've gotten some great feedback from all those who attended. We only had 11 that were able to come. It was supposed to be a bigger number, but several people got sick, COVID and other things. And it was also a very nice Saturday. So not many people wanted to be inside all day for that. But those who came, it was a good turnout. We had a lot of good people there. and it was quite beneficial. This is something, and I'll say this again in my report later, this is because of our CLG status, this is something we have to do at least once a year. We have to provide a training opportunity. It may be another camp training. We had a grant to help cover most of the cost of this. These are expensive. The camp trainings are quite expensive. This one was $7,000. But I think for the quality of the training, I think it was worth it. Next year we may do a camp training, we may do something else, but we do have to provide this at least once a year. And what's great about the camp program is that it's tailored to your program, and it goes anywhere from basic to high level historic preservation discussion. So it's really can be a very in-depth training. So anyway, a great program. We really were fortunate to have a great facility. With the Cathedral St. Paul, it was just kind of a perfect location for that. The trainers were excellent, great expertise, and great presentations. So I think it was really beneficial, and I'm looking forward to hosting the next one.
For those that were present, I think that's all of us. I think all
Yeah,
four of
everybody
us
here
were
was
there.
present. Yeah.
Would you like to, is there anything you'd like to say about the camp training? What you've learned? Did you think it was useful?
I loved it. I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing. I wish there were more people. You know, I think it was great for the people that came. I wish and I understand how difficult it is to get people to attend anything. And, but I thought it was well worth it. I thought there was a lot of great ideas.
Yeah, I think they were knowledgeable people, and they were really good presenters. I mean,
Great presenters.
Sometimes you fall asleep during presentations, but they were excellent.
That's what the
Sometimes you
candy
need,
was for.
You need like critical mass for everybody to get on the same page. Otherwise, you're always explaining the same thing to everybody all the time. And having more people have heard it, they'd already start at that page. It would have been helpful for us as a team.
Chris and I were talking afterwards. It was a great Historic Preservation 101 course condensed into one day.
Yes.
I think my biggest takeaway was that it needs to be community-led. You know, it's not something that we should just get an agenda and try to get it done. If it doesn't come from the community, it's not supported, it's going to fail.
Right.
Yes.
So that's what
Right.
the biggest thing I took away from that.
And how to do that. Yeah, and it's almost like there's nothing too much to do to get that done. And the other thing I really liked when they talked about the slide saying, would you approve this or would you approve that?
Yeah.
I thought that was a kind of a fun game, you know, where they had actual people saying, you know, we want to do this to our building, and is it historic? And then having us say, gee, I don't know, would we approve that or would we not approve that? Because I think it kind of got us in the head game of what we might actually be asked to do.
So they are willing to come back and do a more extensive training
Yes.
just like that. So I too thought that exercise was incredibly useful, and reached out to the camp facilitator just to say thank you, and said that portion of the training was just incredibly useful, and because it's information that we'll be applying here very soon, even as we start to look at some of the grant applications that we're reviewing. And they said that they could actually do an extensive training just around implementing design guidelines and or like reviewing applications with that design lens, right? Whether you're using the Secretary of the Interior standards or local design guidelines, how you review applications and make decisions. So they're willing to do an extended training on that.
Sure, and there were things like, you know, like what if you need to put an ADA ramp in and it's not necessarily historical. It can't be historical, but you need one. What are you going to do? I thought those were good questions to ask.
And they were very knowledgeable. They weren't just book learned, right? They had a lot of experience dealing with this firsthand. So that was a big value, right? They just didn't read it out of the book someplace, and they brought a lot of practical experience.
Fantastic. So it sounds like it's a thumbs up all around.
Yes.
To the quality of the training.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, lots of good feedback. So.
Do we have any further discussion about the training, or can we move on to new business? Move on to new business. So the first item on the agenda is an introduction.
Yes.
I'm Dave Ford. I'm the new planning director, so very happy to be here. I've got some experience with local historic districts and HARB. They call them HARB in my world, Historic Architectural Review Boards, but I suspect it's pretty much the same thing. And I'm glad to see this initiative started because I really think that a key element of economic revitalization is historic preservation. You know, you really want to be able to make sure that you can create that sense of place that's going to draw people to your community. And often that's, you know, a big part of that is the historic structures you have and making sure that, you know, any improvements are historically appropriate. So I'm really very enthusiastic about what you're doing, and I wish you all the success in the world.
Well, welcome to
Thank
the
you.
city of Erie. We hear that you're coming from out of town.
Yes.
Where are you coming from?
Most recently, Nebraska,
Okay.
Omaha, Nebraska. But I spent most of my life in southeastern Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
That's where most of my background is. I was a city manager most of my career. So,
Excellent. So you're going to be bringing great experience to the city.
could everybody just real quickly identify themselves so I can associate a face with a name?
I'll start.
Right.
Jeff Solonis.
Right?
Mark Tannenbaum.
Yep. Liz.
Liz
I know
Allen is
you.
in council.
Melinda Meyer.
Okay.
Dave Brennan, we met before. Dave, how you doing?
Okay, that's right, we did, yeah.
I'm Jason Zork, I'm here on behalf of the planning commission.
Okay, very good. That's all I have.
Okay, wonderful. We look forward to
Yeah.
working with you.
Well, I'll attend your meetings at least. Thank you.
Okay, so let's jump to the mayor building.
Indeed. So this is our very first discussion of a local designation nomination. As I was talking to Melinda beforehand, we all know the mayor building or the mayor block, also known as PACA. It's already listed on the National Register of Historic Places as of, I can't remember the month last year, but I know it was last year. I want to say it was early in the year, was it not, Mark?
It's about it, yeah.
I can't remember the exact month. That being said, because it's a National Register listed building, it would almost make it automatically eligible for local designation. Therefore, the nomination is fairly short because there is a 37-page National Register nomination that has already been filled out. So we did fill out the nomination form. It is clearly eligible for National Register, is listed, and would thus make it eligible for local designation. If approved, this would be the first designation for the city, local designation for the city. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. We had some technical difficulties putting the digital form together. And so I was only able to get it out earlier this morning. That being said, I'm looking to your comments and your suggestions. Also, just to make sure we clarify, because Mark is the director of PACA, he would not be eligible to vote on this nomination.
I vote yes, anyway.
What a surprise.
Well, and again, you know, as I mentioned before the meeting, since we received this nomination earlier today, some of us may have not had the opportunity to read it in its entirety. And so depending on the comfort level of commissioners, we may choose to use the following month to review the nomination and vote at our next meeting. Or if what you're seeing is acceptable, we certainly could vote to approve the nomination today. What I wouldn't want to do is not give it the time that it deserves. And so one of the first questions I had looking at the nomination is that the description is a collective of buildings. It's my understanding
I
that
had the same question. Go
the
ahead.
mayor building is actually a single building.
Well, it is a single building, but it has 5 addresses. So it technically is 1501, 1503, 1505, 07, 09. which might, and, you know, this is all the thing, it might complicate some components of this. So 1505 is what our address is, like our mailing address, but like, let's say, the Clay Space ladies just rented the downstairs 1501, and they're gonna be their own, and they created their own 501c3, and they may look for something, and I'm not sure if they would or wouldn't, but it, you know, they may look for something as 1501. And then the other thing would be, by extension, and I would hopefully think that we would be the catalyst for other mayor or construction company buildings to be included, which would include the Mercantile building, which would include Junior's Last Laugh, or the Keller's, it's called Keller's now. Room 33 is certainly a mayor building. The Commerce building obviously was, but there's a handful of these buildings that were right smack on State Street, and it would be its own interesting collection.
Sure. This is just off the cuff, but I would probably say that it's a single building with multiple storefronts, which is how it earned its multiple addresses. We have many historic buildings that are single buildings,
Right.
but they have multiple storefronts and therefore span a series of addresses.
It is one deed, if that helps the definition, but if you would search it on the city register, it goes 1509 1501-11. I'm sorry, 09. 01 to 09. So actually one address won't pull it up if you search it, you know, through the database. It, you know, because that's how Erie does that. It uses all the addresses. So it does do that when you research it that way, but there is in fact one deed.
Yeah, and I really do think it's one building as opposed to a collection of buildings. But again, that's just the initial question that I had up front.
That was my first question.
Was it?
Well, and you know, not just for us, but I mean, let's say, you know, we're dying to get the building, obviously it's no secret, you know, to move forward in the future for a building, you know, just south of us. But that also has multiple addresses. But, you know, we're not the only building that we might be considering in the future that would have multiple addresses. So I think using PACA as the example or whatever, you know, is it deed, or is it per deed, or is it per address? And that's a good question for us to answer.
I think it has to be deed.
I do too, but you know, I just think that that's kind of a question that we're going to have to address, not just for this one thing, but for lots of things.
Absolutely. So let's see.
And even on I'm so sorry. Even on 6th Street, if we're thinking about that, there may be buildings that have multiple things happening in there, and even separate addresses or separate entrances, but still might be on one deed.
Sure.
And we're going to have to look at those individual buildings also.
So Jeff and Dave, do either of you have an opinion as far as, I don't know, can you share? Have you had the opportunity to
No,
review?
I just, this is the first I've seen this, so
Okay.
I would prefer we wait till next month.
Okay.
Yeah, I skimmed it. I didn't get a chance to look at it before the meeting. But you have a couple questions about the criteria there? And it probably, maybe if I read the whole full thing, I'd probably get it. But I thought it says, it is the box where it says it is a work of a notable architect, or craftsperson or builder, but it's not checked off. But down below you say it is. I'm just questioning why that box isn't checked up above criteria.
What page are we talking about?
There's no specific reason for not checking it.
Okay.
We can check it.
We can certainly check it, because that is kind of the crux of why it's important, is that it was built by the Meyer Company. So yeah, we can definitely check that. I think initially because it is a distinctive type of building, a two-part commercial block in a neoclassical style.
Okay.
But yeah, we can certainly check that box as well.
Yeah.
There's no real reason why we didn't.
And then the first one, I read some of it, but the event in history is the fire? Is that what the significant event is?
I think it would be the flood would be more
Okay.
the
So that's the
significant
event you're
event.
referring to in your criteria?
You know,
Yeah.
we do have, go ahead.
Well, according to the National Register nomination, the period of significance, the reason a fire was listed is because the 1908 fire destroyed most of the building and it had to be kind of rebuilt. So the part of the outside, the exterior remained, but they had to rebuild the floors, had to rebuild the roof. So that makes it a specific period of significance because it was rebuilt. It's not the original 1899 building internally. That's the significant
That is
part.
true.
Okay. I
There was
just
a-
didn't
there
read
was-
the whole thing, so I just questioned
Sure.
that criteria.
Actually, I have the newspaper articles where it talks about that fire and has drawings of the damage done, and it's pretty extensive. It was almost like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. You know, someone dropped a cigarette in a bunch of sawdust and
Yeah.
set the whole building ablaze. And it was the most damage to a building economically up to that history in Erie, like for cost of a fire. But then the flood in 1915, it bent that I-beam in the back that we've seen, and that is the only existing artifact of the city of Erie flood in the entire city. Like, that's it. But the water definitely bent that I-beam, and that shows you the force of the power of the flood and the damage that it wrought. But there's no even high water mark anywhere, like in Johnstown, when you go and you can see, you know, places where this happened and this happened with the flood. That's the I-beam sticking out the back door is the only physical artifact of the flood in the city here.
And so I don't know that we need to vote necessarily. I think that we probably just need to agree. And Chris, please correct me if I'm incorrect, that we would like to take the month between the October meeting and render a verdict at the November.
Sure, certainly.
Do we take public comment on this also?
So because this is an individual nomination that is being put forth by the owner, it does not require public
Okay.
comment.
I just wanted to ask out loud.
Yeah, it's the larger districts that would require a public meeting.
You know, that being said, if you think that it would benefit the process at large for us to go forward with public comment, although of course you invite the public and all, but I would do it if with help. You know, we could do it at the theater, we could do it someplace else, we could do it here. But if you feel that it would benefit the process in the future for us to do that, I would do so. But if you don't think it would benefit the process, then we can skip it.
Right, well, this is just my opinion. I think what we do now would set precedents going forward.
Mhm.
So if
Right.
individual nominations that are put forth by the property owner are never going to, if this would be the one and only time we have a public meeting, I would say we don't do it, because that's not part of our process, right? Our process is to solicit community feedback extensively when a proposed district is in front of us, versus, again, the owner of this building is putting forth this
want to.
nomination, you
Right.
want to do this.
And
It's a different set of circumstances.
right, and the public does have the ability to speak at these meetings,
Yes.
planning commission meetings, city council. They have those opportunities, and for a single building, I think that is sufficient. The larger districts where you're engaging with multiple owners or stakeholders, I think those certainly require a public meeting to get all the feedback we can.
So what will happen with the guidelines for this building? When will those be? You're obviously, you mentioned before, you're willing to accept whatever, but when will the guidelines be formalized for a commercial building? Because we don't have that.
I think for individual buildings, we won't have guidelines for individual buildings. We'll have to develop citywide guidelines for individual buildings, or just use the Secretary of Interior standards. Because it applies the same as a district, right? We're just reviewing any changes, major external changes to a building. We're not going to be reviewing internal changes or anything of that nature. We'll just be reviewing exterior.
And especially those that
changes.
could be seen from general thoroughfares.
Yes, yeah, anything from viewed from a public right of way. So individual buildings, we can write a statement that will be following Secretary of Interior standards to review those, or we can develop some citywide guidelines, but that would take some time.
The EDDC is developing them for commercial buildings,
Yes.
right? But they're not-
No, hold on. The Erie Downtown Partnership.
Yes, the partnership is.
Okay, all right. So they are developing standards for commercial buildings, right? But those aren't in place yet.
So the Erie Downtown Partnership is developing guidelines for a portion of the Erie Downtown Partnership's footprint. So the portion of the city that the partnership is focusing on spans like 3rd or 4th Street on up to 12th Street.
Or the railroad tracks.
Or the railroad tracks, yes, yes. And it is State Street, right? So what's interesting about their guidelines, though, is they're being developed in part because Erie Downtown Partnership, they are a downtown improvement district. They are also managers of the city's Main Street program. And so they have facade grant programs. They have multiple programs, right, through which they distribute funding to property owners to make improvements to their properties. And so, in part, these design guidelines will be used by the Erie Downtown Partnership in implementing their programs, but they are also available to any property owner within that area who wants to make improvements and follow those design guidelines voluntarily. We have had some discussion as a group whether or not these design guidelines could be used as a start for design guidelines for commercial properties that extend beyond the Erie Downtown Partnership footprint. And quite frankly, the design guidelines could be used for other commercial properties.
Sure.
Many of the styles that are represented in those design guidelines are represented within the West 8th Street commercial corridor, the Parade Street corridor, the Peach Street corridor, right? All of those commercial corridors, they all have the same style of buildings or styles of buildings as is represented in the Erie Downtown Partnership's design guidelines. But to Chris's point, until that document would be revised for our use, right? We'd have to make some adjustments to the design guideline document for it to be used for us. Simply using the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic buildings will suffice for our purposes in any case.
I mean, I would be willing, and I don't know if I'm being too acquiescent, but if they're going to develop the downtown guidelines, I am one block away, almost without seeing them in advance. PACA would be willing to follow those guidelines, and we would set the standard. I mean, we want to be a vanguard in this process, and if we can agree to their terms, I mean, if they're not onerous, and I can't imagine.
Well, do you want to see them first before you agree to them?
Well, yeah, I would, but I mean, at the same, I mean, it's not going to be more than what the National Historic Register is.
Well, how do you know that?
Well, how would they do that?
Well,
I was gonna say these design guidelines are actually based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic
I'm already
buildings.
covered by that.
And you're already doing that. Mm-hmm.
So if there was any way that I could agree with this without obviously shooting myself in the foot, and I just thank you, but I would do that for the good of the order.
Okay. But again, it's voluntary on your part. You're not required to do this. You're saying you would be willing to, but they're not finished.
They're not ready.
Yet.
But if they might be.
No, they are very near completing the draft of the. They're probably 99.9% finished with the design guidelines for the Erie Downtown Partnership footprint.
Going back to setting precedent, I guess we just want to be careful what we do now.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Yes, I don't want to set a bad precedent, but if I could set a good precedent, then I'd be willing to do so.
So again, if we, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure that we need a motion for this, or we just simply state that this is what we're doing. If we'd like to take this nomination and kind of work through some of the questions that we've had with regards to the nomination, as well as some of the questions that we have with implementing a landmark or individual building designation over the next month, and then we come back and at our November meeting, we actually formally review our questions and or vote on the nomination in front of us.
Melinda, may I add something? If we choose to do that, I would prefer that if you have questions about the nomination or suggestions, that you get back to me as soon as possible. My schedule is very booked this month. So I would like to have time to be able to set aside to change whatever needs to be changed or add things, take away things, so that it can be prepared for that November meeting, because this is going to be a very, very busy month with the preservation plan. Also, we have talked about, I know with Melinda, our ordinance does not really say anything other than historic overlay districts. We can nominate individual places for local designation, but the term landmark is not used in the ordinance. A district can be any size, from 1 to however many. We can stick with it being just a district and it being a single building. That's not a problem with me. Landmark's a more traditional term, but districts are landmarks too. So we can stick with just the district terminology, but we may have to look at like our bylaws. If we're going to stick with just a district terminology, we may want to look as if, such as PACA has several addresses. If it's one building with multiple addresses, or there's just 5 buildings within a district, we need to determine how big that district needs to be before we have a public meeting.
Doesn't the ordinance say single site though, as well?
I can't recall off the top of my head. It does say something about individual locations,
does.
but it just doesn't use the term landmark.
Right.
So it can be an individual building, but it'd still be considered an overlay district.
Which is really unique, because when, I know that when, it was probably the task force that was working, was in place at the time when the last planning director, Kathy Rosdick, was working on the ordinance. And landmark was definitely brought up in conversation. We were going to have the opportunity to approve historic districts and or landmarks. It's interesting that it did not make it, that word landmark never made it into the ordinance.
And to change it, I believe, would be something city council would have to do, if I'm not mistaken.
We ultimately may decide that that's the option, but for the time being, we could probably just go forth with.
Yeah, for me, a district can be
right?
anything. It can be
Well,
one building,
so-
or it can be 100,000. It doesn't really matter.
So here's the zoning ordinance. It says, the Historic Review Commission shall limit its consideration to the following criteria in making a decision on a nomination of an area, property, site, structure, or object for designation by ordinance as a historic structure, historic district, historic site, or historic object. So a single site would be, that would be PACA, right? You're right, it doesn't say landmark, but
We do
Actually,
consider
I
it
would
landmark.
refer to it as a historic structure,
A site is more like a park,
right?
a cemetery, archaeological site. An object would be a statue,
Tree.
tree, something of that nature. But yes, a single structure, single building.
So I go back to the original question, do we need a motion, or can we just agree that we're going to be
I think
Well,
voted?
I'll make a motion, then we'll make it official.
Okay,
That
okay.
we will review in the next month the PACA application.
And get feedback to Chris by what date?
I'd prefer if I could get it by October 15th.
So we're gonna review, I'm gonna write this down, so I got review PACA application. This month. Questions by email to Chris. And then we will vote on it in the November meeting.
So motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Dave. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All those in favor of approving the motion to review the nomination for the PACA building, or the mayor building, at 1501 through 1509 State Street between October and our next meeting, providing feedback to Chris by October 15th. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
And I would recuse myself,
Recused.
just for the record.
Okay, excellent. For C, we have, Chris provided, I think, somewhere around September 12th, a revision of the guidelines for the grant program that is being created with American Rescue Plan Act dollars from the city that would support building improvements for properties either within a locally designated historic district and/or with historic structure designation, now that we've determined that we can use historic structure instead of landmark, as well as properties listed on the National Register or determined eligible for listing on the National Register. So these were the guidelines that were presented to us. I know I have a series of questions that I will share with Chris via email after the meeting. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share?
Well, I have a couple questions. We actually, at the previous meeting, which I think was in July, made a list of changes that should be made to it. So a couple questions from that. A lot of these things made in, but it said Chris is in discussion with Erie Redevelopment Authority that these may be upfront grants. Has anything changed on that, Chris, or is it, this is after the fact they get paid?
That is probably a clarification we have to make with Aaron if they're reimbursements or if they're upfront. I'm not opposed to either.
Okay. But that hasn't been decided?
And not yet.
Okay. Let's see.
I have a comment on that one.
Okay.
I think you'd be wise to not give any money up front. Make sure that the project's done correctly, they pay the prevailing wages and so forth, then give them the money. Because otherwise you may pay for it and you may not get the product you're looking for.
Okay, good point.
That does sometimes make it more difficult for a small organization such as PACA, because we oftentimes don't have, like the doors that we're looking for, and I'm gonna give you a copy, they're $35,000, you know, to install them, to do historically accurate, to do what needs to be done with the right proper hardware and everything. It's crazy how much stuff costs. I'm not sure we have $35,000. We'd have to go to the bank and borrow it. We could do that and then reimburse that, but sometimes that process of having to pay up front and then this lengthy process of getting money returned actually stops people from doing it. I'm just saying, as a user, that's a tough stumble. That can be a tough stumble.
So this may be another question for the city's redevelopment authority.
Because ECRA doesn't do that. ECRA doles the money out, you know, and we spend it, and then we get more money, and we spend it, and we get more money.
Right. So grant programs work differently. There are certainly,
Right.
You know, there are grant programs where the grant is actually awarded up front, and there are other grant programs that require proof of payment and then their reimbursement. But, you know, to address that question though, I know that we have done, I have done through other organizations that I've worked with, when there has been, at the risk of a financial hardship of the grantee, we have not forwarded the funding to them, but we have allowed them to submit an invoice that we then pay directly. So the funding does not go to the property owner, the funding goes to the contractor, and that's only after reviewing and/or inspecting the work.
Sorry, I'm probably getting more involved than I should, but I think that sounds somewhat like progress payments, and I think that might be a good way to strike a middle ground. Is you can submit an invoice or submit documentation for a payment, you know, periodically subject to review. Like if you're going to get new doors, have Chris look at the doors and say, "Yep, that's right. That looks good. That's what we agreed to. We're going to pay that."
That's fine. And the fact that that PAC is not a flow through, I mean, that's often what we are, is we end up being this flow through. If it goes directly to the contractor, I don't think that's less paperwork for me.
It also avoids the grantee having to take out a loan to cover the cost of the project. But again, that's only if the redevelopment authority is open to that, because that does require a little bit more administrative work, and it means that their financial department would be issuing perhaps a few more checks potentially.
I will, once we have discussed this, I'll be arranging a meeting with Aaron Snippert to talk about our changes.
If I may, just to have more conversation about this, when we received some assistance to get the windows installed to the front of our building, we did get some assistance from the Erie Redevelopment Authority, and I believe there was a five-year window, and what they did was they gave us, let's say, $25,000 over 5 years, and the caveat was that every year we retained the building, we gained 25% ownership of that debt. And then if we kept the building for 5 years, the debt was erased completely, 100%. That being said, if we had gotten a donation from them or an assistance from them, and then went around and sold the building, we would be required to pay them back. And I think that's fair. I mean, if you wanted to, I think that's another layer of protection for the city's funds, so that someone isn't just getting a bunch of money and, dresses up their building and then flips it and keeps all the profit. We don't care about that because we're in it for the long haul.
Right.
So that didn't bother us, but I don't think that's an unethical safeguard.
No, and again, that's.
But just to bring that up, if Aaron want to be participant, that would be part of the deal. Or even if this is part of the deal from these funds, I don't think that's a terrible idea.
It's very common for building improvement grants specifically. It's very common to require
that you hold the building.
Well, no, yes, I guess, I'm sorry, yes, that the property owner maintain ownership of the building and or business,
right,
depending on the type of grant program, for a year.
Yeah.
And then sometimes there's a tier.
Right.
So if it's sold after a
Right.
year or 2 years, then 50% of the grant is due back.
This was 5 years.
Okay.
So every year we gained 20%. But the 5 years, I think, has elapsed. I think we own all the windows now, so.
Congratulations on your windows.
Next there was discussions that the guidelines should require 10 to 15% matching from the grant recipient. Was that decided?
Was it not added?
I didn't see.
There is no matching fund requirement in the most recent version.
Right.
I know we discussed it. I don't think we ever determined if it was 10 or 15%. Either one's fine with me. I think for these types of projects, that's not going to be a hard thing to do. It doesn't have to be a cash match, just has to be a match that.
But again, the ERA is going to make that decision. The redevelopment authority is going to make that decision on what the amount should be, or if there should be a matching fund.
I mean, it was left up to us. We're the ones who are writing these guidelines and the ones who will be approving these applications. So that is up to us.
So I will step out on the ledge and say I'm quite comfortable with 10% because I think that's it. It's still, if you have a $15,000 project, that's still a little bit of skin as
I think
you've got in
having
the
skin
game.
in the game is always a good idea.
Mhm.
Yep.
People should be responsible.
So again, your $30,000 doors.
Is $3,000.
Mhm.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, so you put up the 3, and they would put up the balance.
Yes.
Okay.
Sold.
What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
I think it's reasonable. 10% is not a huge amount, but it does.
Right. It's still a lot of money for us.
And just for clarification, such as our CLG grants, the one we had, the first one we received to pay for my position, the first year was a 10% matching grant. So, I mean, that's fairly standard, I think.
But someone could also come in with a $2,000 project or a $2,000 request, right?
Yes.
Where they match
Anything up to 15,000, yeah.
200
But,
if I'm doing my math right.
But they will have to come in with a document that says, hey, here's my invoice of $30,000 for the doors. You give me $27,000, and I put so they have to prove to us how much money they're going to invest in the thing. Right?
So with the application itself, the application actually will require a scope of work. It should also require any accompanying document, whether it be architectural drawings or sketches from the contractor,
And
right?
this is why I brought this today,
Right.
because I anticipated that.
There will
And
be
in fact,
support
it does have
documents.
an estimate of cost.
And the application will be through the Redevelopment Authority, through one of their applications. So we won't have to create an application, but it will have all those things.
They are creating the application.
They already have the application in place, they just have to tinker it to what we are doing. Tailor it to what they're doing.
One thing to consider, if there was a additional match, there'd be more funds available for more people.
Mm-hmm.
If the one person doesn't get more money, because there's not, there's lesser amount of match. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. If there's more match required, that means there's more opportunities for different people. So you could look, I'm kind of looking at it two ways. It'd be nice to get that money and make sure it pays for whatever they need, and have them let less skin in the game, which make things happen quicker, but then again, there's less opportunity for others to use those funds. It all depends on who applies. So it's really, I'm just kind of just thinking out loud ahead, because I've seen a lot of programs where it is one-to-one match. And there's a lot of skin in the game.
No, that's very common. So, would you like to see, I like the low match because I think that it means that it lowers the financial burden or hurdle that property owners will need to address when applying and completing projects. But again, I completely understand that with a higher match, the dollars could be spread farther. Do you have an alternative suggestion that
No,
you'd like to
I'm just,
propose?
that hasn't really been discussed yet, so I'm just bringing that into the discussion. Because if there's more, there's less money per, then it spreads it out further, so is that good or bad? But then again, I said, it really matters who applies and what the projects are. I don't have an answer, I'm just gonna bring that into a conversation to consider.
Yeah, so the grants are $15,000, so the max would be $1,500 that would be available to somebody else if we don't give them the whole amount, but say if they have to provide 10%. I just don't want people inflating their price by 10% and say, okay, here's the price. My job is $33,000, and I get my 30, and they have to document all that.
Yeah, they'll talk about.
Well, all the better if you pay the contractor than the individual.
So let's say that we award, let's say everyone comes in with $15,000 request. Since there's 480,000, we could award 32 projects.
Is it?
We have 800,000.
840.
Oh, it's 800.
840.
Yeah, close to 840,
Oh,
I believe.
I swapped my numbers. 840?
Yes.
800.
I believe that's the amount that, when I last talked to Kathy, that was the amount that we had.
Yeah, it's right there on the front page.
I can get the actual amount from Aaron Snipper, but it's close to that.
Well, it's on the front page there, 840.
Okay, so 56 projects.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of projects.
That's a lot.
Yes.
I can picture a lot of people applying.
And with changing the guidelines that it doesn't have to be already a local designation, it's any building or structure that has been determined to be a historic resource, basically. Listed on the National Register, eligible for the National Register, or eligible as a local designation. Any of those are available.
So it says eligible for National Register of Historic Places or have been designated as part of a local historic district or a local historic landmark. Those are the three.
National Register eligible is pretty much an umbrella term that covers any building that's determined to be a historic resource.
Well, it says is for the national, has been listed on or eligible for.
Or is eligible for.
National Register.
Yep.
Okay. Or has been designated as part of a local historic overlay district.
Yep.
Which Packwood, but no place else in the city is yet, right?
Nope.
Because we don't have we don't have an historic
Nope.
district.
But we have several districts that have been determined to be eligible. We have several districts that are already listed on the National Register. And with Lakota Group, we'll be doing a baseline survey to identify other potential districts. As long as there's an eligible determination, they're eligible for the grant.
So it says has been designated as part of a local historic overlay district. Does that mean if Lakota comes in and says this block is eligible for, that's locally designated historic
Yeah.
overlay district?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. If something's determined to be eligible for the National
It says
Register.
has been designated.
So let's, hold on here, I think we're getting our terminology mixed up. I think you were referring to determination of eligibility for the National Register.
Yes.
I thought what I heard you just say was determination of eligibility for local designation.
And really just being eligible for the National Register makes you eligible to be a local designation.
But let's think for a minute about, or talk for a minute about all of the properties in the city that have that determination of eligibility status for listing on the National Register. You're talking about the Lower State Street Historic District, which includes almost all of the commercial properties from 4th Street up to about 8th Street, 8th or 9th Street.
Well,
We've got the West 6th Street Historic
Okay, so
District.
what it says is, any structure that has been listed on or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places or have been designated as part of a local historic overlay district.
Right.
Yes.
Doesn't say eligible to be part of a designated, it says has been designated. So,
And right now, we don't have any of those designated, so it doesn't particularly matter. What matters is that we're expanding it beyond just because the original terminology was that it was going to be any building in a local designation. We don't have any of those yet. We won't have for at least a few months. So we wanted to get this money out the door, so we expanded it to include any National Register listed property, which includes several districts, or those buildings or districts that have been determined to be eligible for the National Register. And as Lon pointed out,
but it
there's
says has been designated as part of a local historic district, not the National Register.
yes, but that's an or. So you can be on the National Register or eligible for the National Register, or you can be part, not and, or. So if there is a local designation, you're eligible. But if you're not part of a local designation, which we don't have yet, you can be listed on the National Register or be determined eligible for the National Register. So it's not a both category, it's an or category.
And who would determine that? We would. We would?
I can determine that.
Or
I'm
you
eligible to determine that.
So
That
you
was
would
part
do
of a
that.
previous job, was to determine things eligible for the National Register. We also have quite a few districts that have, Melinda pointed out just a couple. We have a massive West 10th Street potential district. There's the 12th Street Industrial Corridor. There's Frontier. There's
Which was determined eligible.
yes, which was determined eligible. So we have all these districts that have been determined eligible, but they're just not listed, which opens this grant up to
Well, then we should
many
change
more
this word and
properties.
say, take out the word designated, because it is not a locally designated historic district until it goes to the process.
But he's
right?
got or.
Yeah,
Or
or that
having
or
been
changes it.
Eligible for part of a locally historic district. It doesn't say that. It's a done deed. It's been designated. That's not what we're saying. We're saying it's eligible.
I don't necessarily agree with that language, but
Well, look on the front page. It says the program provides this, the middle paragraph. Eligible for the National Register of Places or have been designated as part of a local historic district.
yes.
Right.
And we don't have any of those because it hasn't gone through
No,
the process.
but we will. So hopefully, because this grant goes until the end of 2024, has to be, the money has to be under contract by the end of 2024. By 2024, we should have at least
Right.
2 or 3 districts in place. So that would mean that this would still stand. We
But-
don't have those districts yet. We should in a few months.
But you said if Lakota comes in next week and says this block
Yeah.
could be a locally designated district, then they're eligible for this.
Yeah.
But that's not a designated historic district.
Well,
No.
hold on again, you're saying eligible for local designation,
Yes.
Correct.
which is not referenced in this.
No. But then again, so Lakota won't come in, well, they will. They will make suggestions for eligibility for local districts. However, I don't think we need a language that says eligible for local designation. National Register is just fine for designation right now, because we have that or category that if you're in a locally designated district, you're also eligible. It
So
covers
really,
it all.
any building in the city of Erie that's over 50 years old
No,
would be eligible for
Didn't
this
say
grant.
that, because just
No.
because you're 50 years old doesn't make you eligible for the National Register. There's criteria to follow. So that doesn't, no.
Mhm. I'm still not satisfied. I'm with you. I want to get the money out there, but I'm
Yeah.
saying what the words say is it has to be a designated district. A designated district, we have to go through our policy or go through our procedure and designate it as a historic
But
district.
it says or. National Register listed or eligible,
Or
or
have been designated.
we haven't had those yet, but we will. And once we have those designated, then the language you're questioning makes sense.
Right, so there are three different,
I got a suggestion. How about Chris go back? This has got to come before you next time, right? This is not ready for approval?
so let's talk about that for a minute. So Chris shared just prior to initiating this meeting that the Erie Redevelopment Authority Board does need to approve the guidelines.
They do have to approve the guidelines. They were hoping to be able to approve them at their next meeting, which I believe is the 11th.
Of October.
Of October. If we do not approve them today or conditionally approve them, then it has to wait until December.
Why December?
That's their next meeting.
That's the next meeting.
So we're in a tough position.
I was just gonna say. This
So
is the part of government that drives business people crazy.
Right, so our options are to suggest revisions and or conditionally approve today, or so that the Redevelopment Authority Board can vote on the 11th. But that means a whole lot of revision would need to take place between today and the 11th.
Well, you can conditionally.
Kind of behind the
approve it.
scenes.
All right, so here's what I would say to the words, right? When it comes down to National Register, I'm okay with that. We change the other phrase that says, or have been designated or are eligible to be a locally designated historic district.
I mean, technically, I assume that's what we'd already done, but
It doesn't hurt to reiterate it.
yeah, we can do that. It's not a big deal. It's an easy fix.
Well,
At worst, it's saying the same thing twice. But if
Offers
it's
are
not
done.
saying the same thing twice, then you're saying it once, and that's good.
If Lakota comes in next week and and says these areas are eligible, that means those people are immediately eligible for the grant, right? They don't have to wait to become a locally designated historic district.
no, but here, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate here for just a minute, because it is possible that there is going to be a district that is eligible for local designation, but would never achieve would never meet the criteria for National Register designation.
Correct.
So I want to be clear that if we do indeed include determined eligible for local designation, that there's a
So that's
there's a process.
yeah,
that allows
that's
for
part of the
that.
reason why the language is as it is, because a local designation does not have to follow National Register guidelines.
Right.
As Melinda and I discussed before, anything listed on or eligible for the National Register automatically becomes eligible for
Right.
listing or local designation. Local designation does not mean it makes it eligible for the National Register. So I would prefer that the language stay the same, so that if it's National Register listed or eligible, it's open for the grant. Otherwise, leave it as it is, and if there is a local designation, those are automatically eligible.
For the
My
grant.
worry is that if it's eligible locally for local designation but not for National Register, that opens us up to a lot. And it kind of makes the waters a little muddy.
I agree with that.
So I would prefer to leave it as it is, meaning that the grant is eligible for anything listed on the National Register or determined to be eligible for the National Register, or it's already been locally designated by vote of the city council.
And so part of this may also be, and Jeff, if you already know this, my apologies. So these are actually two different processes that we're talking about. There's actually a formal process to get a determination of eligibility for listing on the National Register.
Okay.
There's actually there's a form that you need to complete. The form gets submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. They review it and they issue a determination ruling. So when you submit a determination of eligibility request, you get back from the SHPO a letter that says this resource is eligible for listing on the National Register. It meets these criteria for listing on the National Register. Go forth and submit your nomination. And then the next step is you prepare a full National Register nomination and submit that to the State Historic Preservation Office. We don't have a mechanism for reviewing and or issuing a determination of eligibility for local designation.
Nor do we have the staff capability to do it. That's burdensome.
Am I muddying or helping? I don't know.
We have a process for designating a locally designated
Yes.
historic district.
Correct.
Okay. What I just heard was, okay, if the building is on the National Register or it's eligible to be on the National Register, it is eligible for this grant. If it is not eligible for the National Register, it can't get a grant.
No.
Well, that's what we just said.
No. So again, National Register, local designation are two different processes, two different criteria. Something can be eligible for a local designation that would not even be considered for National Register designation. This grant is eligible to people who own buildings that are on the National Register or are eligible for it.
Okay.
It is also available to any building that has been locally designated. We don't have those yet, we will. So when 6th Street is designated, they're already a National Register district, and they'll be eligible, all right? If Parade Street was, and I don't know if Parade Street's been determined eligible for National Register listing or not. Can't think off the top of my head. Let's just say it hasn't. Let's just say Parade Street has, no part of Parade Street's been designated or determined to be eligible for National Register listing, but we still designate it, give it local designation as a local historic district. Even though it's not eligible for the National Register, it is a locally designated district and can therefore be eligible for this grant.
Would it be helpful to generate a map? I mean, what would?
This is like a Venn diagram. You belong in this group or you're part of this group. But I think what I'm hearing is if it's a national, on the National Register or eligible for it, that doesn't guarantee that it would be. If Lakota comes in next week and says, we like this block, it should be a national, it should be a locally designated district. It is not yet. But if it was eligible for National Register, then it would be.
Yes.
This grant would be applied to it.
Yes.
So it isn't eligible for a locally designated historic district. We don't have that yet. We don't have any of those yet.
No.
We don't have any criteria. So it has to be capable of being eligible on the National
Yes.
Register.
And I think that's a good way to put it. You know, once we have locally designated districts in place, it'll be a different story, right? We don't have those yet. Right now, the easiest way to determine is using National Register criteria or eligibility status.
It might also be important to be careful about how you're, or the responsibility you're putting on Lakota, because even though Lakota has determined something,
It's not been officially designated.
it's not been officially determined eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office. So
No,
So
what
then
we would
nobody's
do
eligible.
is if they did recommend that a building is eligible for, we would do the simple procedure of going to the State Historic Preservation Office and getting an official determination of eligibility. It's a pretty simple process. You send some pictures, you write a document, they review it and send you a letter. I think what we could do is add to that wording, National Register listed or officially determined eligible. We could do that. That's fine with me too. And we already have a lot of places that have been officially determined eligible, so I'm not too worried about it. But if it's a new district or a new building that hasn't had any determination, then we can get an official determination. That's not a big deal.
So my concern is that Lakota, I think the Lakota project, I think we need to almost keep that separate. Because with the work on the historic preservation plan will down the road inform those districts and properties that are excellent candidates for local designation and or listing on the National Register, but the intent is to get this program out now.
But just the fact that they say it could be doesn't make them eligible for the grant.
Correct.
It has to go through the process with the state.
Correct.
Somebody's gonna
Yes.
submit it and
Yep.
say, this makes it eligible.
Yeah,
But
but
you-
right now, we have a lot of buildings that have been determined eligible as part of a district or individually. We have a lot of that already.
But now, so having this discussion though also makes me concerned because it makes me begin to wonder about areas of the city that would be excluded from this funding source.
I think that's where we could add the term officially designated, and we could get that as part. We could get a designation.
Because think of the communities that we just talked about,
Yeah.
Frontier,
Yeah.
potentially Glenwood, West
Yeah.
6th Street, West 21st Street,
21st Street, West 10th Street.
West 10th Street. I mean, we're not talking about the areas of the city that have middle to upper
Yes.
middle
Yes,
class.
and so what we would need to do is look at we could even work on getting some determinations. I mean, part of that will come to the survey project, but that's still months away from even starting.
Both of those. Mhm.
But we would have to get some sort of designation, I guess from the state to do those other projects, which shouldn't be that difficult. And if I'm frank, I don't know how many on the east side are going to apply for this grant. We've talked about using portions of this money, pooling some of this money with other agencies or other organizations to kind of look into working class. We haven't had those meetings yet. I think it's great, but we would probably have to get some sort of determination made.
Which also goes back to the match requirement, which is, again, wanting to make sure that this is broadly, yes, available. Keeping that low so that the
I think that can change, but over time, if there's different opportunities in the future.
Oh, it could, yeah. I mean,
We-
quite honestly, the Erie Redevelopment Authority could also create tiers. You could do the match requirement based on income.
Mhm.
I mean, there are lots of different ways you could do this.
Yeah. And we could also, I mean, it creates some cumbersome work, but we could create a eligibility process for local designation to determine eligibility for local designation. We could do that. It's cumbersome and it adds quite a bit to it already.
Right,
busy
it adds
workload.
another process.
Right, already adds a lot to a cumbersome workload, but we can do it, because I want this money to go out to as many places as possible. I want it to create as many success stories as possible, because it only benefits this program if we do it.
So based on all of this conversation today, I would advise us not to vote on this, as much as painful as it is.
That's fine. Yeah,
It just moves it down the road too far.
I think we
Time-wise.
do need to make sure that we vote on this next month.
I would agree, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done between now and then.
Yes, and any suggestions would be fine. If you want to work up drafts and make changes, add changes to it, that's perfectly acceptable to me too. Would just appreciate if it's, again, done in a manner to which I can get to it and get it back out for review before the next meeting.
Okay. All right, I don't want to belabor this, but a couple other quick points. When does the program end when do they stop accepting new grants? We did talk about that in July, that we put a date in there. Program ends December 31st, 2022, and all grants must
2024.
be under contract by then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the program has, money has to be under contract by the end of December 2024.
Okay,
So it's a rolling deadline, right? That was my understanding. It was a rolling deadline with applications received and approved until all funds are expended.
Or December 31st of 2022.
Yeah, then we lose the funding, then we lose the money.
That's the end.
December 31st of 2024,
Yes,
Okay, 2024.
correct.
Yes.
Okay, but it doesn't say that in here. So I will make a recommend, I'll add something like that. It talks about, if you got look at page 3, item 9. It says a grant request for projects completed prior to the submission of the grant application. Well, now, what's a request and what's an application? What's a grant request, what's a grant application? Is there a difference?
Typically, they're one and the same.
So it says grant request for projects not completed to submission of a grant application will not be considered by the city as it, what does that mean?
So it's not retroactive?
Right,
If they're the
right,
same thing, then,
yeah, it's not retroactive.
right. I had that marked as well, Jeff, as a,
okay,
Wording's a little gunky.
City of Erie
It
Public
just means
Schools.
we
Okay.
won't, we will not review anything, any project that's been completed or has started before, the application.
and the reason I'm guessing that language would be important also because ARPA funding can be retroactively granted, right? So this is a grant program where it cannot be.
Yes.
Right.
So the city is using its ARPA funding for a grant program that will not retroactively.
And we did have
grant
that
ARPA
conversation with Redevelopment Authority money, because some of their grants allow for retroactive and some do not. And it's critical, and part of it is the time that things take. By the time you do it, sometimes you just have to get it done. And then it would be nice if there was a situation where if you had to have it, let's say it's a bathroom, you have to get it done. You can't do it without a wheelchair accessible bathroom, you can't get an occupancy permit. But this process takes so long, and in the meantime, you lose a tenant because you can't accommodate them. And that's, no offense, I mean, that's the difficulty with business and government, is that government is like really slow, and it can't pivot fast.
it's hard to give away money.
It's hard to
So-
give away money.
So lastly, COA, the fee for the COA, what is that amount gonna be?
We have never determined what that fee will be.
Well,
What,
if I
the
was
ceiling?
applying, I guess I'd wanna know that, right?
I think we've talked about it. It's a small fee. It's $25, $35. It's not a massive fee, but we've never officially determined it.
So.
One, because we don't have any districts in which to have COAs.
But they have to do a COA for this.
Only if they're in a locally designated district. They don't have to do a COA if they're not.
That is also wording that needs to be
Yes,
addressed.
I just noted that myself.
Yeah.
I just noted that myself.
So the CO only pays for locally designated.
Only in locally designated districts. I
And
mean, and it's
is-
basically going through the same, even if you're not in a locally designated district, if you're just a National Register listed or eligible building, you're basically going through the same process by getting this grant, where we're gonna review it, we're gonna review your plans, we're gonna review your scope of work to make sure that the work is, good preservation work, appropriate, thank you.
Does the RDA have an application fee?
I don't know, I'll have to ask.
Okay.
I don't think so.
And last question, if I apply, my application is rejected, do I get my $25 back? Is it refundable if I don't receive
If there's
it?
a COA, then I don't think we've ever determined whether, if a project's a,
Right.
Because the
If it's
COA is supposed to cover
reimbursement.
costs that the city incurs by going through the application,
Correct,
right?
right.
They're just gonna go through the process. If
I think-
I'm denied, they still
technically,
have that expense.
technically there's
They
still a
still do.
process.
I would
so-
say no.
So if you'll remember though, so to Chris's point, that has not been something that we've established yet. But if you go back to our camp training, that was actually something that the trainers advised us not to have, or at least if a COA is going to simply, to not have a COA application fee, but to simply charge fees like for permitting, like when you need to do, when the actual building permits need to be issued for the repair work to be completed, those permits will require fees. Our trainers actually were advising us not to have a fee for COAs.
Fine with that too.
What, and then
I
add
mean,
it
there's
into
still
the other
there's still
fees?
a building permit fee because it's part of the building permit application. So I'm fine with that being just like that. It doesn't makes it easier, to be honest.
Would you have a rider that would add onto those fees if they were getting money from the historic?
But this is different though. Like,
Right.
like we're grant application over here, since
Correct.
Mark, you
I'm
would
the user.
potentially be the only
That's
one.
right, I'm the user.
And we've got the COA.
Because when I apply for a plumbing certificate or a building certificate, you know, I pay a fee at that time in addition to everything, which is fine. I mean, and it wouldn't be horrible if there was another $25 fee that went on to that when I had to do that at that time, and that fee went here, because I would be granted it, and then I would go get the building permit and then go forward. Because you'd still need a building permit,
Yes.
like no matter what, no matter what.
So to acquire a certificate of appropriateness, they're gonna have to come before this board, aren't they? So there's costs associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
You really should, I think, charge a fee.
Okay, so you're, the last planner
Right,
was in favor of that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Somebody has to
or-
pay for somebody sitting there looking at it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
not,
there's
it's not,
administrative costs. That's pretty, at least it's been typical in my experience.
and it's not prohibitive. It's not $1,000,
But
you know what I mean?
well,
It's-
that's the question. If somebody's gonna apply for this grant, and we say, oh, by the way, the COA is $1,000, well, I'd like to know that in advance, right?
Right.
Well, I don't think it has to be included in this so much, because what it should be included on is a city fee
The
schedule.
application.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Scheduled city
Right.
fees, that's just
Yeah.
one.
And that was the discussion we've had, is adding it to the city fee schedule.
Yeah.
We just haven't approved or determined what that fee is going to be.
Will this commission need to vote? Or is that an
I think it's-
internal determination?
To have a fee?
Well, yes, for the fee for processing for a COA, is that something that this commission is going to be required to vote on, or is it going to be an internal decision?
I think it's gonna be probably a city council. Well, I can only say my experience, but in terms of charging fees, my experience is usually that city council determines
Sets those.
what fees are
Is that-
going to be charged.
Well, shouldn't be a recommendation by how much time it takes to process and their administrative time, that'd be part of the equation, wouldn't it?
Probably, if there is going to be a fee.
Yeah.
But
I mean-
again, we didn't talk about anything more than $25.
25 to 35, I think.
Yes.
Which is pretty standard for,
Again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If
No.
it's something else, if it's
Yeah.
a standard out there, we can.
Yeah.
I don't
think-
think you need to worry about that. I
No.
think it's really, I don't think have to get to the mechanics of
No.
fees for this. I think it's really for the city administration working with the
Yep.
elected officials to.
But as a grant applicant, I'd like to know what that fee is.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, that would be, this is to apply for the grant. There's gonna be, this document could say there is a fee associated with the certificate of occupancy, see city fee schedule.
Okay.
simple as that.
Something like that. It doesn't have to, if it's embedded in here, then it has to be changed every time if the city
Right.
changes it. So, yeah, I don't think you need to worry too much about that.
Well, just so it's not, again, for the person applying, so it's not like a building permit, it's based on the cost of your building, right?
Right.
This is a
Right.
flat fee, it's
This
$25.
would be a flat fee.
Or whatever it is, but I would like to know what that is before I
Right.
sign up for it. And
By the
I apply
time-
for the,
by-
by the way, it's $1,000.
By the time somebody applies for a certificate of occupancy, we will know what that fee is gonna be, and it'll be published.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is non-refundable. If my grant is denied, that's it, I don't get my COA.
Costs were incurred.
Right.
You had your hearing,
Right.
you lost.
Right.
Okay.
All right, I'm done now.
So then you'll eventually pursue that with city, you'll eventually pursue that with city council then? Is
Yes,
that what-
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll work with Dave and we'll look at some other places and we'll come up with a fee and then get it through city council.
okay,
It's not on the top of my agenda until we have a district.
right, no, that makes sense. Okay, so we've made it through most of the agenda. We just have your report left, Chris.
All right. Well, some of it I've already covered. It has been a fairly busy month, and October is going to be, I think, even more busy. We were able to host our first training program on the 17th at the Cathedral of St. Paul. Attendance was not as robust as we had planned for, but we were able to have a solid group of people, ranging from Historic Review Commission members, city staff, and department heads, as members of our Preservation Plan Steering Committee, and from the Erie Downtown Partnership. We received great feedback, as y'all have provided here tonight as well, on the quality of the training, as well as the expertise and engagement of the trainers. Training was made possible by a grant from the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office as part of a CLG scholarship grant, which covers $5,000 of the $7,000 fee for the camp training. Our CLG status does require that we provide this training opportunities for our commission and staff at least once per year. We'll be looking to host these types of trainings each year. They may be different, they may be other types, but it's definitely something we want to require to do and want to do to keep everybody up to date and as engaged as possible. Most of our work this month has been focused on launching our Historic Preservation Plan project, which was officially announced at the Mayor's Weekly News Conference on August 4th. On September 19th, an introductory meeting was held between the Lakota Group, Historic Review Commission, and Historic Preservation Planning Committee, or Steering Committee, excuse me. In that meeting, it was meant to be an introduction between the groups and to discuss the upcoming visit to Erie by the Lakota Group. The Lakota Group has provided a schedule template for the upcoming visit, October 10th to the 13th. We've confirmed that and made small changes to that schedule, and hopefully we'll get that schedule out sometime this week. Schedule has now been set, and meeting invitations have been sent for each session. Good feedback so far, and it should be a pretty productive visit. We will only have one night meeting during that week. That is an invite-only pop-up community workshop on historic preservation in the underrepresented communities. An open public meeting will be scheduled for November or December. Once the final schedule agenda has been set, I will make sure to get those out. We've also worked to get our first local designation nominations completed, which we are going to table until next month with your suggestions coming on the 15th. We will, by the end of this month, also have a date set for a public meeting for the West 6th Street District. As soon as that nomination is completed, I'll get that out so you can review it before the meeting. We also want the public to be able to review it before the meeting as well. We have to figure out how we get that out to the public for review before the meeting, if we just use social media or how we do that. That's something we need to talk about and determine what we need to do.
When you say public, are you referring to the actual public?
The actual public meeting,
or residents?
Yes.
Property owners?
The public meeting, we did not ever determine whether that would be a public meeting just for the people in the district or a public meeting at large. It's just listed as public meeting.
Okay, because I would say for those that are property owners, if it is worthwhile, I think contacting them directly with a postcard.
Well, there's a whole bunch of rules in there. Where
Right,
you gotta send them all letters. And
right.
You gotta publicize
We have to do all that,
newspaper
and I still have to
the
figure out
whole
how to
process.
do all that.
Okay, fair enough.
But we will at least have a date, and then we'll get on that. We'll get that out as soon as possible. We'll work with others in the zoning department, planning department to help get those letters out and what we need to do,
I was
whether
gonna
it's
say,
signs or whatever.
Just make sure to give yourself enough time because there's a lot of work happening with that historic preservation
Oh,
plan.
yes.
So,
Oh,
okay,
yes.
just
Oh, yes.
give yourself time.
So we hope to have that out. That's my determination, is to get that out, have that public meeting at least scheduled. We also worked on the ARP Grant Guidelines. We're also pushing those back till next month. But this should help us broaden support for a program and help create success stories for historic preservation in Erie.
And when would you like feedback on the Arpa Grant Guidelines?
I think middle of the month as well.
October 15th as well?
Yes.
Okay.
That way I can format it, because it's gonna be a busy month. So we can format the document, get it out, and then start issuing grants. Hopefully, it won't be until at least December, maybe the first of the year now, but we want to get these out the door.
Can I just make a suggestion? Maybe you've done it before, Chris, but get your feedback to Chris, and then Chris, you circulate the latest draft. So by the time you get to
that's what we
Right.
Yeah, up or down.
generally try to do.
You'd see it in advance.
Makes sense.
Just what we generally try to do, but
300.
Mhm.
it doesn't always happen as quickly as I'd like. But that's just because
There's a lot happening.
Well, you
right
set
There's
up
a
this
lot
whole thing for
happening and I'm
October.
one
Yeah,
person.
it's a busy month, yeah.
We'll get you a bonus this year.
Huh?
We'll get you a bonus this year.
How about an,
I need,
I'll make a
I need, I
motion.
need at least
How about
two
an
in-
assistant?
I need a couple interns and
how about an
assistant.
assistant, yeah.
But yes,
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. You're doing a
welcome.
great job.
You'll send me a copy of that, the preservation plan?
yes. I need to correct a couple things since we didn't vote on either of the items tonight, but I'll correct that and get it out to you.
Okay.
Any other items? Dave's thrown his hands up. Okay. Motion to adjourn then from someone at 5:33 PM. Seconded?
Yes.
Seconded by Mark. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Okay. Adjournment at 5:33.
I have a 6 o'clock audition.